Well, today we're speaking with David Dubyne, who's the creator of Adapt 2030, the YouTube channel. And we're going to be discussing risks and opportunities facing the global supply chain. This topic today will cover issues such as global cooling, agriculture for the future, and cryptocurrency as a payment medium in something called the Grand Solar Minimum. So, David, my first question is, what are smart contracts and how are they related to food supply chains?
Well, Dustin, thanks for bringing me on so we can talk about what I consider one of the most important issues, if not the most important issue of our time moving forward. We're going into a time where we're going to blend two different technologies. One is the old of what's considered grain deliveries, shipping and logistics, into the blockchain here. So if you haven't heard of what a smart contract is, it's basically computer code that's built into the blockchain in the cryptocurrency network or the nodes itself. And then these nodes execute the code, updates into the public ledger. And when I say public ledger, it's a transparent ledger that everybody can see. And that's the best thing about it. It prevents fraud, it prevents counterfeiting. And it's basically like this. A smart contract is maybe a misnomer. It's more as if a trigger of first this and then that. It's something that's triggered on fields that are filled in where you determine between the two parties what will happen first, and then the second thing will happen, and then the next thing will happen because of that. So let's say money's put into the contract. You could use a cryptocurrency of your choice. You could use Bitcoin, Ethereum, and there's so many others. And then the next field executes. The grain is loaded onto the ship and the amount of tonnage. And then that triggers the next thing. And the whole way along, instead of using paper documentation like we do today in shipping, we can just upload that to the blockchain. That alleviates any types of the counterfeiting that can go on or a dispute in ownership or what type of grains it is. I mean, if you have 60,000 tons of grain coming from the Kansas wheat harvest, it verifies ownership, it verifies what that grain is, it verifies the phytosanitary, it verifies the protein content, the moisture content, and then that's loaded into the blockchain, literally. I mean, a lot of people like to use it for keeping money in escrow or buying something, but it has so many utilization points moving forward.
So why do we need smart contracts?
Well, when you think about it, it's more of a hassle-free way to trace logistics. And, going back to some contamination issues, which we've seen again and again, it's about the origin of specified product A or good A, and then the journey through from where it originates, when it leaves port, all the way through the journey until it's cleared on the other side. Now, what we're having today specifically, and you know as well as I do, there are so many shenanigans going on. When breakbark cargo arrives, the ship pulls up to country, whatever it is, and then they say, I'm sorry, we don't want your shipment any longer. Please take it back. And we have this denial at the port so many times until then you have to bargain the price, even though you think it's rock and written in stone with the letter of credit. It just, you know how it works. With the smart contracts moving forward, and when food gets incredibly expensive compared to what it is today, this type of shenanigans will stop, because in those fields that you enter, you could also program one of those, refuel at port for the shipment, executes the buyer to pay the seller, even though there's no delivery of physical substance. Like, that can be written in there. If you're sending 60,000 tons of grain over to Asia and they say, we don't want it at the port, if it's written in the smart contract that if you deny that shipment and the moisture content's correct, the type of wheat's correct, the date on the yield from which year is correct, everything, the tonnage is correct, and if you deny that, then that will execute and you'll pay me, the seller, and you will not get your wheat. And then I can just start making phone calls to find another buyer on site in the same country. This is going to prevent a lot of fraud moving forward, I do believe. That's why we really need to start using it.
Your YouTube channel, and you were mentioning that there's going to be higher food prices and global cooling and some with a grand solar minimum. So what evidence is there to support your views on these risks to the food supply chain?
For those of you listening, my YouTube channel is Adapt 2030. That's ADAPT 2030. It is all about talking about cycles in our sun that reoccur on 400-year pattern cycles. What we see in the 11-year solar cycle, which we're coming into a solar minimum just on the 11-year cycle, well, those occur in longer time frames as well on the 400-year cycle. And tracing back through history, you can see what happens every 400 years. But then you need to back it up with the science, of course, because written accounts and what the monks had written down and texts of the time and lithographs and paintings and accounts, that's one thing to verify what went on in the societies at that time. To the grain production, the economy effects, and also the population migration, which are always the same three things that you see again and again every grand solar minimum. But now we come in and we start to look at the astrophysicists, and we have great satellite data. Everything was warming until about, I would say, 5 years ago, and it has just turned over the top and has started to decline year upon year. There's later ice in the Great Lakes. There's later ice in specifically Iowa. Great Lake had the most ice for the longest ever recorded since the mid-1800s, and we have these severe winters coming now. There's more snowpack. Still snowing over in Italy at the moment, snowing in Spain, snowing in France. We have more snow on the way in the United States over this next week until May 16th, May 17th. It is definitely turned into something different. The science is very clear what's happening with the sun's output. If you start to take a look at the magnetic effects on our Earth, we have to lockstep with the sun decreases in a 400-year state. Our Earth is all going to match this. Our magnetosphere is weakening now, and you can start to see the effects of the jet streams moving around all over the planet in areas they don't normally go. This is why we're seeing extreme record heat and extreme record cold. I mean, this year in Europe, they broke tens of thousands of cold records going back as far as they went back into the 1800s because of the polar vortex, European superfreeze 1.0 and 2.0. This is a perfect example. Morocco all-time record snows, Algeria all-time record snows. And not only that, cosmic rays are increasing, which have effects on cloud patterns, and we just see more moisture pouring down across the planet. If you've been paying attention at even one iota of the news, what's going on, these natural disasters and mega floods are dominating our headlines, as well as volcanic eruptions. Those are also causation to magma, silica-rich magma chambers excited by cosmic ray density increases. Science is there. History is there. We're at the doorstep of another. It's going to be about a 12 to 14-year pattern where the temperatures are going to drop. There's going to be a lot of effects for agricultural production, but then about 2035, we'll return pretty much to somewhere where we are about today. That's why I bring it to everybody's attention. It affects agriculture, and we need to eat every day. And as you go through the history, the fingerprint of this event that comes on 400-year periodicity or 400-year cycles is loss of global grain production, and even regional back then. It's taken down so many empires. Look at history. Chinese dynasties, they've never survived longer than 400 years. Check that as a fact. Try to debunk this. No Chinese emperor has ever lasted more than 400 years because these cycles come back and they reduce the food production, they reduce the water. Some areas go into drought, there's flooding. Mayan Empire was taken down. Incan empires were taken down. The collapse of the Romans ended. Kofun dynasty in Japan. Everywhere you look, the kings and queens, the wars of Europe coincide with these events on the 400-year cycle of our sun going into a low activity state called a grand solar minimum. And it's not coming. It is here and it's intensifying. And I'm making a mark right here. The weather is going to get so incredibly ferocious by the end of 2018. You'll absolutely be looking for other explanations in CO2 because it is going to be so fast and so ferocious. It is literally going to be a societal reset button for the way that we do global agriculture. And that's why I really like to bring this information and then also combine it with the tech. Because if food gets really expensive, it's going to be the most valuable commodity on our planet. There's going to be more fraud involved with it. Back in the Maunder Minimum, those grain shipments were always accompanied by soldiers because people tried to raid the grain shipments. This is why I'm saying history is just going to repeat on itself. But if you know what the history was, we know what it's going to do, and then we can, come up with solutions to try to mitigate. up with solutions to try to solve. We're on a global network that's all connected. Everybody has a solution, and if we use all these solutions collectively, I really believe our tech is going to bring us through what would have normally been a very tumultuous time, but it'll be less severe because of the tech solutions we have at our fingertips globally. And I'll leave it there, Dustin. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And could you provide a brief background of yourself and introduce your the YouTube channel and any other sources you recommend for learning more about the opportunities and to learning more about this technology and the other trends?
Yes, and the first thing I do want to say is there are opportunities everywhere. I firmly believe that this is the greatest opportunity in human history, bar none. Chinese Chongyu, there's opportunity in the danger. We're going into a danger phase, but there is going to be so much opportunity, exponentially more that has ever been available to humankind right now. You just have to look for it. Where's your niche? What problem can you solve? For example, we'll talk about China just for a second. AC chain. They're already starting to commoditize and use tokens for commodity lots of tea, corn, rice, pu'er cha, high-end gaoliang, and, different types of alcohol. And what they're doing is they're taking out a token for a lot against this particular, let's say it's pu'er cha. Well, there's only a certain amount of tons of it. So they issue a token against the lot of this product agriculturally, and then when it's in the warehouse, you have the token, you are guaranteed right and ownership to that. I also believe moving out into 2020 or possibly 2021, we're going to be doing that with each individual harvest. There will be an ICO for each individual harvest that guarantees ownership, and it's transparent on the blockchain. Maybe it's the 2020 Kansas red winter wheat harvest, and then you'll have to do the ICO, have that token, you'll be able to take your portion of that. Take a look around inside the blockchain space to see what's going on. UPS, they're trying to do the $1 trillion shipping block space. Let's take a look at the port of Rotterdam, also coming into starting to use specifically blockchain. That's one of the world's busiest ports, and we see it again and again. How about the Etherium Alliance? That's another one. That's all the Fortune 500 companies that are creating blockchain technology to be able to settle between themselves. And this is where it gets there, because a lot of those are food producers, and shipping. So these, if you're just going to look for cryptocurrency and then just daily news, you can look at CoinDesk or ETH News. That's ETH News. As we move forward for the grand solar minimum, you got to realize that as the weather change comes, the adoption of cryptocurrency is going to move forward in sort of a DNA strand moving up. So the amount of weather and crop losses is going to match pretty much the global adoption and usage of cryptocurrency. Now, if you're going to look for different websites that cover grand solar minimum changes, you can look at iceagenow.info. That's Robert Felix's site. He wrote Not by Fire, but by Ice. Carlos Ramirez, he follows the cosmic rays. You can look at Heinrich Svensmark. He wrote the book and produced the movie The Cloud Mystery, also talking about cosmic rays and how these affect cloud patterns and how this is now starting to affect agriculture. There's so many sources out there that you can actually dig into. My first suggestion is grand solar minimum. There's a lot of channels copying the same names now because they're jumping on the bandwagon because they see it's hot and there's a lot of views coming at it. So notice there's a whole bunch of new players that have just jumped into the space in the last 3 or 4 months on this topic. But what you really want to do is go back and see who's been in here for 4 or 5 years putting out the same commentary. Suspicious Observers, absolutely a must-watch on YouTube. They cover everything science-wise going through in a very easy-to-digest format. Let's see. Who else might be out there? The Watchers, that's just a daily news feed. SOT.net, they also have all the daily news feeds coming out about the changes in global weather. And, AgWeb, that's a fun, easy one to use when you're looking at the crop planting percentages. And this year, the wheat, for example, is 3% planted, and it should be 30% planted by now. There's just so many anomalies going on with global agriculture. David Taylor down in Australia, he runs the East Coast weather, and he's predicting and also uses sun cycles to put predictions out for Australian weather. He's saying they're about to enter the all-time coldest winter ever this year or next. Piers Corbin, He's an astrophysicist as well that follows climatic changes based on the output of the sun electromagnetically onto the earth. It does keep going on. And my very favorite, who brought me into this space, John Casey, former NASA advisor. He wrote the book Dark Winter and Upheaval. This person is probably the number one to go-to source first, John Casey. And this is a great handful to get you started. If you really do run down all the links I just told you, you will absolutely be armed with the information, understand what's going on with the weather changes, understand how cryptocurrency is moving forward, and then you can see how the two are going to blend together so succinctly, specifically for logistics and shipping.
Thanks again, David. And I'd like to, if there's an opportunity in the future to talk, that'd be great to get some updates on how to take advantage of the opportunities with cryptocurrency in the supply chain.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And if anybody does want to send me a personal email, you can reach out at adapt2030@oilseedcrops.org. That's the website I run to talk about different changes and using plantation management for different biofuels that provide food first, fuel second. Oilseedcrops.org, adapt2030 at oilseedcrops.org. Thanks, Dustin. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate everybody out there listening. I hope you got something out of our conversation.